So you got the job, and now you're a sales engineer. Congratulations! Now that you're in the inside, you have a new set of challenges coming your way, from hitting individual to team goals and making sure you're growing in your role. And to top it off, you'll have a direct manager that will be assessing your journey and progress. What about your manager's manager? The director level? What do they think about? What do they care about? What are they assessing? Well, in this episode, I get to speak with Lee Johnson, sales engineering leader and chairman of Diversity, Equity, Equality, and Inclusion for the Pre-Sales Collective, an organizational network that helps aspiring, newly made, and seasoned pre-sales professionals to grow in their careers. And we get to talk about the day in the life of a director of sales engineers and how you can be successful.
The Tony Moze Podcast.
Hey, Lee, thank you so much for coming on the show. So the question I like to ask is, could you talk about your journey into pre-sales? Like, how did it start? What were the series of events that, led you there? And did you think you would be in this specific role? What was the inspiration that said, heck, let's get into pre-sales?
Well, it wasn't a situation or incident where, it wasn't that I had a chartered path that was going to bring me here into pre-sales, right? It was more of a situation where I had applied for a role that was asking for a solution architect in an area where I had expertise. So a little bit of background about me. Up until that point, I had spent the last 15 years of my career implementing S.A.P solutions all around the world. So, for I would say probably 10 years, the first 10 years of my career, I had implemented S.A.P all around the United States. And then probably, I think it was 2008, no, probably 2009, 2010, I got an opportunity to travel to South Africa and implement S.A.P. And I was there for about 2.5 years. I met my wife there, got married there, but then we left there and we went to Singapore. We spent more time in Singapore. Eventually, when I left Singapore, I came to the United States and I was in Seattle, Washington, helping Costco to implement their S.A.P solution and spending time between there in Europe. So I had a lot of expertise in this area called S.A.P. And there was a job role that had said, hey, I'm looking for a solution architect who has strong S.A.P technical skills. And I applied for that position. Lo and behold, that position turned out to be a solution pre-sales position. Didn't know what the term was, but eventually I came to know what the term was. And ever since then, up until now, and I've been, just working in pre-sales, trying to find out everything that I could find about it. And that's my journey to this point.
And I heard you say S.A.P. I heard that's like a behemoth type of system. Could you tell, what is S.A.P and why is that maybe important today?
Well, S.A.P is important because I think they say about 80% of the world's transactions go through 80% of the world's business transactions go through an S.A.P solution. So many of the largest multinationals have implemented S.A.P to run their business. Now, what's different about S.A.P is it's most critical to that organization as a whole. When S.A.P is down, the application and the business is also down. So it's very critical that the S.A.P solution is not only online, but also that it is performant to meet all of those transactions that are occurring through it, right? So that's what S.A.P is. It's an enterprise resource planning application, or ERP for short. And I've been doing that ever since 2000.
And so how long from when you first got into this, pre-sales position, and until you got into management, how many years was that until you got into management?
Well, I would say I became a manager at the company probably after my third year. Could have been my fourth year, but it was my third or fourth year where I was promoted from an individual contributor into a management role.
Awesome. And of course, I want to talk about that later too, to let people understand the difference between the two. But from here on out, now you get into this management role. Like, what got you into management? Like, what was the inspiration, the activities at work, etc.?
Well, I had always been in management roles, but sometimes when you make a lateral move, you have to make a lateral move where you're no longer in management, you're in an individual contributor role as you learn that company, as you learn that business. So when I left Accenture, right, I was a senior manager, and one of my projects, I was responsible for managing a team of 160 people. Another project that I was on, I was responsible for managing 30 people. So I had already been in management. It's just that during this particular time, it was a role that I wasn't necessarily familiar with. I took an individual contributor role so that I can learn the business without the responsibility of managing a team, right? In order to learn the business.
And the director role, manager role, or anything below perhaps executives considered middle management. Is that like the correct term?
Yeah, I would say up to director. Then you go into executives with the vice president level. So you could probably say, from manager up to director, senior director is going to be middle management, vice presidents, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents. Those are going to be the executive tier.
Okay.
But that it's probably going to be different depending upon who it is that you're having a conversation with, right? Everyone would probably have a different conversation based upon that organization. There's no hard and fast rules per se as to what do people consider executives versus management.
Right. So there's like no like yeah, hard or fast, discrete like areas. But like what about this whole idea between, individual contributor versus manager? Like, like what's the difference between those? And is that still like a general like term? Like how do you look at both those roles?
For me, an individual contributor is basically responsible for them and themselves alone, whereas the manager is responsible for the team, right? So, as a manager, what you have to do is you have to get a group of individuals, right, to basically sometimes put down their own personal ambitions for those ambitions of the team, right? So, what you need when it comes to being a manager is the manager needs everyone who's on the boat rowing in the direction at the same time. So, if you've ever seen a crew event, right, you see that when the oar comes out of the water, it typically goes back in a certain cadence. That's what you're trying to get as a manager, is you're trying to get all the individual players on the team rowing in the same direction at the same time with a certain frequency.
Hmm.
That's the real difference. Whereas that individual, he's just rowing, he's just doing his one job,
Yeah.
right? And if he does his job and everyone else on the team is doing their job, right? You can be in competition to win. I love it when I don't know if it was the Tom Brady, which you could have an appreciation for, or if it was just the Patriots, but in their football life, one of the things that they had as they were running out of the tunnel is a poster that was on the wall that just said, just do your job, right? So the individual components, they're just worried about doing their job. And the manager is at another level, at maybe 1,000-foot level, looking at the individual players, understanding how does that collectively come together so that we can meet the overall business unit or business objective.
Yeah. Okay. So you use the analogy of rowing a boat, but I'm thinking about the day to day. If we're just looking within the director versus executive versus first line manager, is that what you would say? Like the person who gets out of the individual contributor role and gets into their very first management job, is that considered first line management?
Yeah, that's going to be a first line manager where they are responsible for the individuals who are doing the in work that probably directly touches the customer, right? So when I think about management, I think about it as an operational, tactical, and strategic types of levels, right? So if you were to say that the executives, they're dealing with things that are strategic for the business, right? That middle management, they're doing things that are more tactical, maybe at even a business unit level, right? Whereas the line managers, they're responsible for the operational, and they're looking at their resources to make sure that they have enough, and that they have enough so that they can meet whatever the business goals and objectives are set for that department per se, or that team per se.
So these are the differences between the director versus executive versus first line manager. Now, if we're looking exclusively just at the directors, like what do you and your peers, your director peers, that level, what do you guys care about?
Well, the thing that you care about is meeting the objectives for the department per se. For instance, in pre-sales, if the quota is, let's say, $150 million, right? The leaders of that department are responsible for ensuring that we have a clear path in order to achieve that quota,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, every individual on the team is going to have their own GAF report, right? Goals achievement form. But those individual GAFs should lead up into everyone hitting that overall departmental number. When it comes to a team, you don't win as an individual, right? So just if that account executive who's aligned with an SC, if they are able to hit their number, right, and be successful, but the other portions of the team are not hitting their number and unsuccessful, did you win or did you lose? Right? At the individual level, they would say, yes, we won, we hit quota, we got our accelerators and our modifiers. But when you look at it as a business level, right, you actually lost because the business unit didn't hit its objectives.
Okay. Um, and for those people who are perhaps considering leveling up, or just I mean, obviously there's the individual contributor, there's the management role, but even there, within the individual contributor, you could level up into there, versus, and likewise with management. How do how does one know if being an ICE individual contributor versus a manager is a good fit for them?
Well, they will take on certain roles and responsibilities within inside of the team to see if management is for them. I would say one of the reasons a lot of individual contributors are promoted into management roles just because they were good as an IC.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's a totally different role that you're playing when you are a manager than when you are a very good IC. And I think that that is a deficit that we don't account for enough as people are being promoted into management. You got a whole different skill set in the fact that as an IC, I have my objectives and my goals, which I have set with my manager. I only need to look out for that one individual hitting his or her goals, right? Whereas a manager, you have 5 resources, 10 resources, 50 resources, right? And you're trying to ensure that the goals that the individuals have set up for themselves are going to be in alignment with what the overall department goals are. So, for instance, you can't have someone on a tangent, right? Otherwise, back to the crew analogy, that one person who's off by that split nanosecond or millisecond is going to draw off the whole team, and the objective is not going to be met. So how do you, as a manager, have these conversations? I would say the biggest challenge as a operational manager is being in a position where you can find what motivates that individual to bring them their best self to work, right? Because if you have a highly motivated team player, that team player is probably going to be more performant because they're happy about work, they're excited about work, etc. I have, those are the things that are differences between being a manager versus being an individual contributor.
And so, they have the different levels within the individual contributor. You start off maybe as an associate, then the standard SC level, then the senior, then the advisory, then principal. And obviously, it could all vary between organizations. You could be considered a lead or lead principal or whatever different facets or names they come up with. But they say that I've heard that the difference between an IC, individual contributor, and a manager is that one manages people, the other one manages the product. Is that true? Is that how you would say it from
Uh,
highest
uh,
one?
I, if you go and search on Amazon, you'll find that there are more titles under leadership. I think, there's always a constant battle with leadership titles versus cooking, right? There's always different titles that are there that would tell you, well, this is what a leader should do. A management course that I took, Foundations of Leadership, basically says that um, machines need to be managed, people need to be led, right? Machines need to be managed and people need to be led, right? And my wife and I, as we were exercising yesterday, we had a little debate about a boss versus a leader. And a boss is, as she sees it, someone who is just laying down the rules of this is how it's supposed to work, etc. And my definition of a leader is, you're leading people is when you look back and you see people following. That's my unofficial definition for what a leader is. And you can be a servant leader, you can be any kind of leader. But my definition of a leader is when you look backwards, you have people who are following you. And they don't have to be, right? No one has put a gun to their head and said, you must follow Lee or it's going to turn out really bad for you. I don't think that that's leadership. That's more of a autocratic or type of leader. And I've worked with professionals, and in doing so and working with professionals, I believe that the professionals can figure it out, but they do have to understand that we're trying to achieve this overall larger objective, right? And they need to make sure that their personal objectives are aligned with that larger objective at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, after serving in the army, you got to see the examples of leadership, whether with, leadership or just managers or bosses, if you want to say, good and bad ones, of course. I got to see that even just like starting off my army time. And I wanted to ask you that question. I think you answered some of it. I guess to ask even in your experiences throughout any of the SE careers, throughout any of your endeavors, like, just looking at your superiors, like, over time, bosses, managers above you, what would you say are the qualities of a good leader or a bad leader? A bad leader, like, is there a difference? What would you say about them?
Well, the thing is, my management style has always been I lead as I would want to be, as I have wanted to be led before, right? And, there's one manager who comes to mind that was he led by example, right? And he would always say the right things and do the right things at the right times, etc. Almost to the point where, the mantra that I took on is, one, I didn't want to let him down, but two, I learned a lot by following in his footsteps, how he conducted himself, how he carried himself, how he dressed, his persona when he was in the meeting and having the negotiation. All of those things were character traits that I picked up on, and those character traits are things that are still with me today as I continue to lead.
You, yeah, yeah. So I had a side thought again on this one too. Like my time when I worked in, when I worked in psychology, and then even all the way to this time, I noticed that I've had a first line manager, if not several of them, and then I'd have our director. And something about these directors, even a captain in the army who's supposed to be in a sense a director level for the company, I noticed how they would say the quote, they kept their ear to the streets. I guess I could try to like talk about a little bit better, but like meaning like they were really like glued. They knew the pulse. They felt the pulse of their subordinates. Like they knew the names. They knew exactly where they were from. I'm like, wow, these are directors levels, a couple steps above me, and they have taken the humility to want to learn who they're working with. I don't know. In my experiences, I've seen director levels, though I know they're a couple levels above, still being able to have, you know, still having that tactical grasp, that day-to-day grasp as a lower member. And I kind of think that's pretty cool. So I don't know. I guess that was just a side thought.
But there's a piece to it. Like if you were, I was in the military, I was in the army as well. And if you think about it, um, a lieutenant, first lieutenant, second lieutenant are going to be at the squad level, right? And then they report into a captain who's going to be at the company level, right? You typically have to go to lieutenant colonel or major, and they would be responsible for the brigade, right? And the brigade would feed into something else. When you think about line management, is pretty much the same. But the grand compromise that I believe that managers have to do is they remember a lot of managers were promoted because they were very good ICs, right? But when you get promoted into management, the skill set that you need in order to be a better manager is probably, I would say, 99% not what it was the skill set that made you a good individual contributor, right? You got to be a good listener because you have to hear people, right? As an individual contributor, you only needed to motivate yourself. As a leader or a manager, you need to manage and motivate others and get others to buy in. And how are you going to do that? In the military, just because I'm a captain and I give an order, someone has to follow my order, right? But in the public sector, if I tell someone to do it, that person doesn't have to do it, right? They could resign or they can do it slow. There's other things, but literally in the military, when you say when a superior, whether that's an NCO or CO, right? When they say do something, it gets done, right? Because there's just different dynamics that are available there that you have to appreciate just a little bit differently. Whether it's right or wrong, right? In this new age of where we are and the dynamics of the cultures that we're working with, the generational differences, is you can't be autocratic in what you say to your resources. You got to think about whether or not if they're happy here. That's the real difference that I've seen in my 24-year career, is that before it was a very hierarchical structure, right, with people dressed to come into work a certain way, etc. And nowadays, if you were to go to the generation that's coming into America, coming to work in America, they're more about the gig economy. They're not really as focused on their career. Now, this, you can't paint with a broad brush, right? But that's something that you have seen uh, uh, in today's talent resources as they're coming on board, is that they value things differently than what were valued by previous generations before them.
Okay. So last question for this segment of the show. Maybe we'll get through just maybe one out of them or all of them. But you were talking earlier about ICs and managers and assessments and whatnot. But let's look at just lower members. Individual contributors. Like, how do lower members get assessed by managers in pre-sales?
Well, for me, right, I'm all about OKRs, right? Objectives and key results. And that's a conversation that we're having for my resources who reported into me. We did that at a quarterly level, right? We would talk about what it is that was going to be done at an annual level. We would dissect and break that down into quarters, and we would set objectives and key results for each quarter, right? And then we would have one-on-one discussions to check in to see how progress is happening. But at the end of the quarter, we would have a self-assessment as to, well, these are the objectives that you set for yourself. Did you hit the key results that we had set, right? Because then that means that either if you didn't hit what you needed to hit, you were going to bring some of those objectives into Q2 or the subsequent quarter, and that would impact how you would manage, right, what you were going to do for the remnants of the prior quarter objectives plus what you had to set for yourself for the subsequent quarter, because all of this leads into what you were looking to do at that annual level. That makes sense to me, right? That makes sense to me. But, in the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr, OKRs is something that have been practiced at some of the leading companies. So many of the FANG companies, I think he pushed it out at Google as well as Facebook at the same time. And of course, those are the biggest name companies that we have today. So it works for me. It's a way that I would like to be managed. I see a lot of times people get this anxiety towards the end of the quarter, or end of the year, when they have to have their performance review. I believe that's nonsense, right? Those are conversations that should have been had throughout the year, right? And also documented throughout the year, such that when the end of the year comes, everybody is already aligned to what it is that they were expecting to see.
The technical win. So this is like a new thing. People always wanted to know, how do, brand new or just individual contributing or just SEs get assessed? There's this thing called technical win. Like, what is it? Like, what are the items on that list as examples that you look at, from your perspective, from a managerial perspective? And is that part of an OKR or separate?
No, the technical win is not going to be a part of the OKR. I would say that the technical win is more going to be something that's a part of the job role. If you wanted to set an OKR, you would say, how many technical wins would you like to have achieved in a quarter? That would be an objective, and then you must define what the key result of that is going to be. You see what I'm saying?
Okay. And like, what is a technical win? What would define that as one?
Well, the technical win is when your customer tells you that your solution is technically superior to any other vendor that they have seen, right? And there's things that you can do with that, and there's things that you can't do with that. For instance, if your customer tells you that yes, you have a technical win, right? So your solution is superior to any of the other ones that they have seen, right? That's going to give your account executive an opportunity to know what levers that they are going to pull in order to get the contract signed, right? If you have the technically superior solution, right, they should want that, right? So they should want to pay a premium for it if it matches the requirements for their business. However, if you do not have the technical win, right, there's still an opportunity for the account team to go in with different incentives to help that customer to sign, right? They might have to do discounting and other bits and pieces. They might have to throw in some additional services or things of that sort in order to get it signed, right? Because although the SE has secured the technical win, that doesn't mean that you have signed a contract, right? So you can't go, dancing around that, oh, I have the technical win. That doesn't mean jack, right? You have to have a signed contract in order to say that you have revenue that's going to be coming in, right?
Yeah. Okay. And this is good because I'm saying this in a way that people who don't know necessarily what a technical win is, so I want them to know about that. But like, how about this? Like, if the SE got a technical win, that's good on their part, though, right? Like, you can say, okay, this person got the technical win, like excluding it being closed. I thought the difference between it being closed would be more for the AE, the account executive, and the technical win would be more for the SE. If the SE got a technical win, can he or she just walk away and be like, look, I did my job. I mean, like, would that be basically, would that still allow them to be employed if they got technical wins?
As an IC, right, I would say yes, they would, in theory, be able to walk away. But in reality, right, having the technical win doesn't mean that you secured the business, right? So this is a team sport. So everyone would have to contribute until you get ink on paper. Once you have ink on paper, right, then you can say we have secured the business and everyone can go out and dance.
Yeah, so segue into this idea, about success on the SE and the AE, and also securing that deal. A win for everyone, a success for all. How about this? Like, I noticed in a lot of SE organizations, like, the level of enablement seems like a new thing. Where resources are limited and scarce, or they don't have a system, a standard, or protocol for training SEs of all levels. I feel like, I don't know why. I mean, I don't know how long pre-sales has really been. Like, when was the inception of pre-sales? But, like, we're still functioning in this day where there's really, like, resources are scarce or limited. There's no necessarily a system or standard or protocol for training for SE of all levels. Like, why is that?
Well, the thing about it is when you get onto calls, different SE leaders are struggling in certain instances to be able to justify their resources and the value that they're bringing to the business. So there's two parts to that question as I hear it. The first part to that question is from a complexity perspective, right? The complexity of the solutions are getting that much more sophisticated, right? Before it was that you only had to know a piece and parcel of what that solution was going to be, right? But now today, the complexity of the solutions, in my opinion, have increased drastically, right? So the SE is under extreme pressure to constantly stay ahead of the curve as to, well, what's happening with the product, right? Because the product is evolving, right? So whose responsibility is it to stay ahead of the product? That's the SE's job, to stay ahead of the product and to answer those technically difficult questions so that the AE, in my opinion, can deal with closing out the business and working with marketing, et cetera, to ensure that there are leads coming into the funnel. At the end of the day, this is a sales process, and you have to look at the sales funnel and do qualifications and things of that sort to make sure that, at the top of your funnel, you're always going to have 100 leads. But those 100 leads are going to turn out to be maybe 2, 3, 4 contracts that are actually going to be signed. So that's a lot of rejection that the account executive and the marketing team, all of them, have to deal with in order to be able to finally get that piece of paper done. But remember, all of this is happening within inside of that 90-day window. And that's where the stress comes into the entire process, because you have a quota that you need to meet. Otherwise, there are consequences to that. And that's one of the things that I like most about sales is in certain other verticals of the business, right? You may or you may not know, well, what is your impact to the business? In sales, every single quarter, you're going to know how good you did, and everyone else in the business will know how well you did or didn't do. That's what I like about sales the most, is because I can quantitatively measure how well I did or did not do for the business.
So the perspective I had on this question too was, my experiences working at a company, of 600 employees, but, an SE team of, I think, maybe 20 to 40 versus a company that had 100,000 employees with an SE team of, I could say 100, and I just noticed a disparity between the two. You had a smaller company, of course, and I could be answering the question myself, but I noticed in my experience, smaller company, very limited, scarce resources, larger company, a lot of resources. And of course, both companies have products that are constantly evolving. The previous tech company I had was a very large portfolio of different products versus the more recent company I was in had a very large portfolio of products as well. And I just found it very interesting, especially talking with other SEs that are working at a technical company that has the same makeup of SEs where the team is about anywhere between 20 to 50. And they're talking about how, like, we don't even have a set process for that, let alone even managers, guys who just got into, ladies and gentlemen, who just got out of a senior SE role. And this is their very first management role. And they're talking about how, basically my manager just threw me a few documents and just said, hey, just like go have at it versus a formalized, systematized way of training their SE and SE managers. So that was where the question was based from.
Well, the thing about it is a larger company has access to more capital so that it can invest in doing singular track or singular focus items. Whereas a smaller company, a startup, right, it's going to be scarce on resources because it's scarce on capital. So the difference that you have is that you're going to have to wear different hats at a smaller organization, right? As the SE, you might be in helping to write the S.O.W. You might be in there helping to write the M.S.A, right? You may be working with marketing and you may be working in product with more of a unstructured process, right? In order to get certain things done. That's what happens at a smaller organization. At a larger organization, there are certain departments that are responsible for that function, right? The thing about it is that a small organization is agile and can move very quickly, whereas with a much larger organization, then you have all of these bits and pieces that you have to move, and it takes more time.
And so while the people are listening, what I heard you say MSA and SOW, could you tell them what that means?
Oh, statement of work is the SOW, right? The MSA, Master Services Agreement, is the larger contract that you have with your customer that basically calls out all of the T's and C's, right? Now, there are going to be certain bits and pieces of work that will be done underneath that MSA, and each one of those would be a statement of work that has to be signed, right? So you, in a smaller organization, yes, you're going to be responsible for working on those items. Whereas if you were an SCSE, that's not really within your wheelhouse. That's really the responsibility of the account executive to take care of that.
Okay, cool. So we're talking about just before segueing into this idea too of SEs, sales reps. We were talking about pre-sales, sales, but now looking at the other department, we got post-sales as well. And there's once a customer has purchased the product, the deal has been closed, and now it goes into customer success or post-sales. Like how they talk about this term, the handoff, like how I wanted to actually talk a little bit about like what the handoff is, but like how well do you think the handoff is? Like what have you noticed between organizations? Like how well do you think the handoff is between pre and post sales? Like what do you think will ensure success, and why is this important?
Well, I can tell you that the handoff is usually not going well, and that's to the detriment of the customer, right? I'm a developer by training. I have a computer science degree. And in my developer mind, I think that the handoff between sales and customer success should operate at like an API, right? Or a programming interface. And the fact that I can call that API and I know exactly what I need to send it in order to get back a certain bit of piece of information from it. What I have found, the handoff between sales and post sales or customer success is that API isn't well defined between the two departments, and everyone is clear as to, well, what is supposed to be handed over in order for that next department to be successful, right? It's usually, well, this is what I have, and I'll give it to you, right? But that process isn't complete. That there's no real feedback loop, so that the process, a business is a living into a living structure that is moving and changing at all the time. And even though you might have what you believe is a clear handoff document from sales to post sales, it's going to iterate because the product is changing. So that handoff is supposed to be a constant feedback loop between the departments to say, let's change this, right? So that I give you what it is that you need. But in my experience, it has always been, although we're supposed to be working as a team, we tend to work as silos. And then it becomes a us versus them type of scenario. And that doesn't bode well for the business, nor does it bode well for the customer. And at the end of the day, what matters the most is what's happening for the customer. The customer is the crown jewel, right? In my opinion, this is the way I look at business, because from a sales perspective, especially how I've been selling, is I've been selling a subscription, right, since I've been in pre-sales, right? So with a subscription, there's always going to be an opportunity to renew, right? And when I renew in 3 years, I want that customer to have had a great experience, such that when I come back to them in 3 years, right, they will be excited and motivated to sign again with me, because one, we did everything that we said that we were going to do for them, and they feel as though that they've been taken care of. At the end of the day, like, customers are people, and at the end of the day, I believe that they just really want to be heard, right? And that someone is listening to them. And if you can do that with a certain amount of respect, right, that customer should be willing to do more business with you in the future.
So yeah, so having that communication between the customer and then of course internally, I'm also thinking about pre-sales and post-sales, customer success and of course the sales engineers. Do you think that the sales engineer should continue, like, have a close line of communication with post-sales within the entire life cycle of that customer's
Yes.
experience with that
Yes.
product?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember, the business is evolving. There
Yeah.
are people that are changing inside of it, right? That's where you really have someone who is acting as, like a chief operations officer,
Mhm.
right? Because the chief operations officer is looking at the business and identifying inefficiencies within the business and trying to figure out, well, how can this process work much better, right? How can this process make much better? How can we take cost out of running the business, right? And that cost that's being taken out of the business can be invested in another part of the business because we found efficiencies. So now, if we found efficiencies as a business, we should be able to beat our competition because we're leaner, we're meaner, we're more agile, right? And that's when you go from being an individual contributor and thinking about, well, I just need to make sure that what I'm doing is done, and you're putting on that hat and you're saying to yourself, is what's being handed to me, am I receiving it properly? Is everything that I need in order to do my job there, so that I can take the baton and run my sprint, right? So you have to look to your right and ask that question, but you can't just look at your right and ask that question. You also have to look at your left and ask the question of, am I handing off properly to the downstream business that's going to be accepting or receiving my outputs, right? So you're having a conversation with the left side and you're having a conversation with the right side, so that you want to make sure that that piece of the business, you're not the CEO who's responsible for the entire business, right? I believe that you're responsible for your business, right? And you're someone's customer, right? So that owner needs to make sure that you're happy, right? As well as you have customers, and you need to make sure that they're happy at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, it's very difficult, right? When you're going from a startup, and there's CMMI, which helps you to understand the maturity levels of your business, right? And whether or not if you're operating mean and lean, right? So there's CMMI level 5 that says that you have identified full processes, you have communication loops, all of these things to get efficient. When you get there, you're in a constant position of continuous innovation, where you're getting better and you're getting better and you're getting better. A lot of a lot of those concepts have come from huge manufacturing organizations, right? Have come from huge manufacturing organizations. So that's just a little bit of it. But at the end of the day, this is a business, right? And we need to be in there so that we are doing our part to ensure that our business is growing, because year over year, every business that, especially a publicly traded entity, has to be in a position where it's growing.
It's awesome. So like switching gears here, I know the last question I asked is for people who have already been in, they already get the whole idea. Primarily the reason for the show is obviously to, inspire and inform and educate those who are considering the career, who are aspirational or just starting their like first month, first year in the role. What would you say are some certifications, someone must have to be considered a worthy candidate in pre-sales, or for those who are already in pre-sales and just trying to level up?
Well, I don't know if there is a certification, right? I don't have any certification with respect to being in sales or pre-sales,
Mm-hmm.
right? As I mentioned earlier, that how I got into sales and pre-sales was because I had developed a certain level of expertise around the whole S.A.P ecosystem, right? And that's how I got into sales, right? But I would say, if you're going to move into pre-sales or sales, it's best to get a mentor or someone who is doing the role, and that person is going to be able to help you to understand, well, what does it take to come into this business? Like, you've seen many different businesses, right? If I was to be working for S.A.P and doing pre-sales, it's going to be totally different than if I was working for Siemens and doing pre-sales. It's going to be totally different than if I'm working for Consensus, or if I'm working for almost any company, right? There's a baseline that you can be trained to, so that you could start understanding the language, et cetera. And that's what the Pre-Sales Academy does for you. It helps someone who is coming from a psychology background to move into a pre-sales background. But still, in my opinion, the company that you're going to will have to tool you up to be able to go in front of their customers, right? So you tell me, but with what you were doing at Dell, the pre-sales academy helped you to have a baseline understanding so that you could be competent, but you had to go through the Dell pre-sales academy in order to be in a position where you would be able to sell their wares. And it would have been different if you had gone to ServiceNow. And it would have been different if you had gone to VMware or if you had gone somewhere else, right? So the certification or the training program will take you to a certain point. It will help you to understand the language, etc. But when I came into pre-sales, there was about a year that I was looking for books and things of that sort to really figure out how to do the job good, right? And when I finally found, Mastering Technical Sales, right? I was like, this is the book that I've been looking for. And John Kerr was on stage at the event that we had. And I'll tell you, he was giving away the book. I took two of them, right? I took two of them. And some other people, they didn't value the book. But for me, I read that book twice, thrice, right? And it's always right here by my desk so that I can read it. I'm a Kindle guy, right? I love a Kindle because electronically I can search, whereas with a book I can't. The other day when you sent out a post, like I think you were doing great demo in doing discovery, I was going to say to you, dude, you need to get that book on a electronic format because there's only so many of these things that you can put on a book to be able to reference the page that you're looking for. Now, inside of my Kindle, I'm like that. I can find a piece of information that I'm searching for in a nanosecond.
So you talk. I mean, certifications. There's the talks out there that you should get an AWS cloud practitioner, AWS solutions architect, GCP. Other things. Are those just like considered nice to haves versus like mandatory to getting into to pre-sales or tech? I mean,
well, that's if you're going to go and do one of those certifications, it's going to be so that you can be an engineer on their offerings, right? So I would think, yes, if you were going to be working in one of those where the product was a Azure or the product was a GCP or the product was an AWS, yes, it's going to be hard for you to have credibility in launching an application on those platforms if you have no idea what those platforms are. You're walking into a room where you're having a conversation with a customer, and if you can't tell them how to deploy the application on that particular platform, I think you're going to lose credibility, right? But how do you get, even if you were to go and get an AWS solution architect certification, you gotta have some tool time, right? Before you can be an expert and tell people how it works, right? You got to have some experience to tell people how it works. So the certification, I believe, now I'm not against certifications, right? I have probably 21 certifications, right? Everything from an Oracle certified DBA all the way to a TOGIF enterprise architect, right? I even did my CISSP once upon a time just for giggles. But those, in my opinion, are door openers, right? Early on in your career, if you wanted to work in a particular discipline or domain, having a certification would give you a leg up against someone who doesn't have a certification, right? And that's something that, yes, I prescribed to that model earlier on in my career. But today, what I'm bringing to the table is something different, right, than whether or not if I can get on the keyboard and put together a Perl script or Python script and go into it like that. No, that's not what I'm bringing to the table today. So if you're early in your career and you want something that's going to possibly open up a door and give you an advantage against another candidate, I would say go for a certification all day, every day. But if you're more into your career, you know, it's just a matter of sitting for another certification. And I'll say to you, well, what's wrong with these 21 that I already have?
Yeah, especially with 21 certifications. It's like the
Yeah,
nail
you
in the
can go
coffin.
onto my LinkedIn page and you'll see that I have a number of certifications.
Yeah. So, like with your, with the vast amount of certifications you have, from developing your expertise in S.A.P. and then of course getting up to where you are in management, like who today are, what are your inspirations today? Like who are your mentors? I mean, like, where are you normally learning from?
Well, I'm always in a position where I'm trying to learn more about the business. I'm trying to better understand my customer and how it is that my solution could actually help them to achieve their business objectives, right? I'm trying to open those doors and build out those relationships. And that's because I've always been on the back office, right? And didn't have to do those things. The shiny object for me is being able to understand how to open up the door, how to build out those relationships, how to be an AE. An AE may want to be an AE today may say, oh, well, I want to know and understand more about pre-sales. I'm the inverse and I want to understand more about what the account executive does. Right. So I've been exploring whether or not if I want to take on quota and extend myself in that direction just the same. I think everybody wants to know a little bit of something that they don't know. And that's where in my career I think would be the next step for my journey is to understand, well, what does it feel like to have quota on my head, and how do I handle that?
Yeah. And in terms of like learning, what like, in terms of books, like what have you been reading, that has been instrumental to your growth, and what do you recommend for people reading today, those who are considering the field and just starting?
Well, the best sales books that I ever read was mastering no mastering the complex sale. So when I came into this, I was in a delivery function and working with all of the account executives. I said, hey, if you were just sharpening your teeth in this game, what book would you read? And I would ask every sell account executive who I was working with that book. The best one of those books that I read was Mastering the Complex Sale. But I like doing discovery, right? Because discovery is the essence of it all. Because if you can get discovery right, I believe that Peter says it in his book, that is a competitive advantage, right? But another book that I picked up from another colleague was The Evolving Sales Engineer, right? So at the end of the day, you can read 1,001 books. At the end of the day, there's going to come a point where you have to make something your own. You have to develop your own personality. You have to develop what's going to be you. You can't bring Peter Cohen into the room. You can't bring John Kerr into the room. You can't bring whomever into the room. It's going to be you that's in that room. So there's a certain point in time where you just have to dust off all of the imposter syndrome, and you have to be in a position where you say that this is my own. At the end of the day, you're going to be in the room with the mouse by yourself doing the demo or speaking to the customer. And John Kerr and all of them won't be in there. You have to develop what's going to be your style.
Damn, I try to like drape some John Care books on me and think that everything's just gonna go fine. So that sucks.
Yeah, no, John Kerr, he's going to prepare you to get in there,
Yeah,
right? But at that point in time when you are in the bubble, it's you and you alone.
yeah, yeah. So Lee, last thing, if you can impart any last words of wisdom to someone who wants to get their first job in pre-sales, like what would you say?
I would say if you really wanted to make that transition into pre-sales, put together a plan. One, right? If you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. Two, I would start networking with individuals who are in the spaces where I want to be. A lot of people don't leverage their networks enough, right? So I would start leveraging those people in the spaces where I want to be. And, pre-sales collective is where things like that happen, right? They have the local chapters where you can find people who are nearby you, and it costs you very little to take someone for breakfast or coffee. I don't take people to dinner because dinner can cost you $150, $200. But coffee, a cup of coffee is less than $5, right? If you take someone to lunch, that can be about $25 to $50, right? So I personally would prefer to do that over a Zoom call because I like to shake hands with people. I like to look them in their eyes. I like to get to know people. So that's what I would suggest to anyone who's breaking into the field is for them to go out and meet some people who are doing what they want to do.
Lee, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and of course, hoping people got some wisdoms and some nuggets from these questions. Again, thank you again.
I'm coming up to Boston and you taking me out to dinner.
Let's do it.